Welcome to the first ever WCAT podcast.
I'm Jack Hunter, joined alongside by Reilly O'Neill, and we have two very special guests with us today. We have Coach Doug Boomer and Coach Brent McGuire, two assistant varsity baseball coaches. Today we're going to get their stories from their upbringings to their collegiate careers to their coaching careers. But Coach Boomer, let's start with you first, and then Coach McGuire, we can get an answer after Coach Boomer. But most recently, the 2020 varsity baseball team, which is the play was suspended by the GHSA because of the coronavirus outbreak. So I know how it is as a player, and I know how upset our team is. But from a coaching perspective, what is it like when you got the news that we're not going to be playing again this year?
Oh, it's devastating, disappointing, obviously. We were talking a little before the show came on, but just about how competitive us coaches are, as well as the players. And we want to be out there and win, and we had some good things going. And, from my perspective, the pitching staff was really coming together, and that's the area that I'm, responsible for. And, we were scoring a lot of runs and really starting to gel as a team, and it really started to feel like we had chemistry. And, when those things happen, usually there's, very, very positive results out there. So it was disheartening, to have to bring it all to an end for our sake personally, but also, we care a lot about the kids, and we want them to realize that success and have those, competitive situations and dreams and all that kind of stuff come true. So I'll throw it over to McGuire. How do you feel about it?
I echo your remarks, Coach. And I've been in education for 34 years, and I think today is probably the lowest mark of my educational experience, just because of where we are in today's world and where we are today in terms of athletics. As Jack just mentioned, and as you just talked about, they're pulling the plug on high school sports in the state of Georgia, and I think that's going to be a continual echo around the country without a doubt. And so it's just very unfortunate, and we've never experienced this before, so I'm having a hard time dealing with it. And when I was asked to do this podcast today, I said, this is great because it's the first time I've been able to get back to baseball and talk about baseball, and I've missed that over the last 20 days since we've been separated. So it's a challenging day today in terms of Westminster baseball, and I feel for the kids. They're the ones that I know are going through the struggles the most. You and I are going to get an opportunity, hopefully, coach next year. We'll be able to coach a team again next year. But for right now, it's these kids that are not having this opportunity. I feel for our seniors, those 12 wonderful seniors that we had on the team this year, incredible ball players, incredible character kids. And we were on a little mission. We were, like you said, we were starting to gel. And we were playing good, solid baseball in all aspects of the game, from hitting to pitching to fielding to base running and everything is starting to come together. And I was really anticipating at this time of the year right now where we are, because we'll be playing Lovett and Pace and Redan right now, and that's the stretch run of our season.
Yeah.
And looking forward to the great run through the playoffs, and I really felt that this team had the opportunity to go deep, really deep into the playoffs. And so it's going to be what if, and you just wonder what this team could have done. And so I'm just at a loss, if you will, today, and I'm at a loss for what's ahead of us for the next few months. So but it is good to be here today to talk baseball.
Yeah, and Coach Boomer, I'm sure you can speak more onto this, but I think that a really tough part about the season ending is, I feel like as a player, I felt that we were destined to go all the way, and that our pitching staff was so deep. I mean, coming into the season, I think it was a little bit of a concern, but like we got to the point where now it kind of felt like we could play like 2 or 3 straight days of double headers, and we'd be fine on the pitching front. And so that was tough to see, especially because we necessarily weren't supposed to have a great pitching staff this year, and we came in and just knocked everyone down.
When the preseason practice first began, I was a little concerned that we weren't going to have that one big, electric stopper that could, put up a 1 or a 0 against a good team. But as time wore on, I mean, our kids were throwing just a bunch of strikes, and at high school baseball, very often it's the failure to throw strikes that, that ends up killing you. And we were throwing a lot of strikes and with good mix. And what we didn't have in one electric starter, we had in depth, like you say. And guys were really rising to the occasion, young people who hadn't been proven at the varsity level. And then we got a big shot in the arm when Jason Longacre came out after basketball. It was over, and he was looking really strong and looked like he was going to be the guy that would really carry us. So, yeah, it was looking so positive there that we were going to be able to hold teams down, and that's a great recipe, for success.
Yeah, definitely. Well said by you both. And, Jack, obviously you've been a senior. I feel for you as well and feel for all the players. And Coach McGuire, Coach Boomer, you were both players. And the idea of this podcast was to bring you both together and look back on your college careers and then obviously your path towards Westminster and your coaching careers at Westminster. So, Mr. McGuire, you shared a little bit about your history at Georgia State and even showed us some great photos of your home run trot before. Talk to us a little bit more about how you ended up at Georgia State and how the team looked back then.
Well, I was a DeKalb County product. I went to Lakeside High School, which is about 15 minutes from Westminster. And I was a homebody. I loved Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta, born and raised in Atlanta, and I wanted to stay in the Atlanta area and play college baseball. That was my ambition when I was a junior and senior in high school. I wanted to play NCAA college baseball, and that was my goal. I was 130 pounds when I was a senior at Lakeside and didn't get recruited by a lot of schools. I had maybe 3 or 4 small offers around some junior colleges and one in Alabama and one up in Kentucky. But here again, I wanted to stay home. So had some good high school years at Lakeside, and I tried out for the Metro Atlanta All-Star team, which back in the day, if you made the team, you got to play at the Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. And I made the team, and the tryout process was a 3-day process and had about 200 high school baseball players from the state of Georgia that were at the tryout. Fortunately, I made the team, and I got spotted by the Georgia State University coach at the time. He was one of the scouts there and came up to me after the 3rd day of tryouts and said, "I'm going to offer you a full scholarship right there on the spot." And everything worked out perfectly because I wanted to stay in Atlanta. I wanted to play baseball in the Atlanta area, and Georgia State was an up-and-coming D1 program at the time. It had only been in existence since 1978. There was a period back in the very late 60s and early 70s that Georgia State played baseball, but then they dropped the program. But it picked back up in 78, and so I joined a program that was up-and-coming, new, and back in the game. And I said, this is it. This is a perfect fit for me. I'm going to Georgia State. And so I accepted the scholarship offer right then and there. Played 4 years at Georgia State. I had a good career there. I had, at the time, since baseball at Georgia State had only been played for about 7 total years, I set 7 offensive records at the time. But they've all been crushed of late, believe me. They didn't last very long, but I did have a good career. Was an all Sun Belt tournament team member my freshman year, and I was a designated hitter my freshman year, and then I started playing second base the last 3 years of my career. So I had a good baseball career there. I still needed another year to go with my academics. So I stayed on as a undergraduate/graduate assistant coach. So I cut my feet there for 2 years as a grad assistant baseball coach. I was real fortunate to have that opportunity to start coaching when I was 22, 23 years old at the collegiate level. So then and there, I knew that that's what I wanted to do the rest of my life, was to be in education. I wanted to teach PE. I wanted to coach baseball, and I'm living my dream.
So, Coach McGuire, you were telling me a little bit before. So, if anybody knows kind of the geography right now, Georgia State is not where their baseball stadium is at. So, can you tell me what your typical afternoon was, getting out of class and getting on over to Georgia State baseball field?
Absolutely, Jack. When I went to Georgia State, my first 2 years, I lived at home because Georgia State at that time was a commuter school. There were absolutely no dorms down there. So I lived at home 2 years. So I would drive to the Avondale MARTA station, the rail, and I'd hop on the train at Avondale, and it would take me to Georgia State, and it was 50 cents to ride one way. And that's as far as the line went. I'd get off at Georgia State, walk to the campus, about a quarter of a mile walk. I had my classes from 8 till 12 o'clock. I would run to my car, get in my car, drive to Panthersville. So I had to leave downtown Atlanta and go to Panthersville, where all the athletic facilities were for Georgia State at the time. It was about a 20-minute ride. I'd usually stop at McDonald's somewhere on the way. I'd get to Panthersville. I would hurry up, get out of my car, put my uniform on right there with my car door open. We had no dressing facilities whatsoever. And we'd have a game at 2 o'clock. The game would last, a couple hours, then I'd head back home. And then the next day I'd repeat the same process. But it was a great time of my life. I loved every minute of it.
And Coach Boomer, you played at Georgia Tech and against Georgia State and Coach McGuire multiple times.
Oh, yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Well, unlike Coach McGuire, who was, setting records for home runs and trotting around bases and all that kind of stuff, my first couple of years, I didn't really play very much, honestly. I was so if he hit that home run in 1981 or 1982, I was watching it from the bench. But my last couple of years, I got to play quite a bit more. I hate to say it, but I don't hate to say it. The series was a little bit one-sided in our favor. We went 9-0 against them, in my time there. I remember some very, very windy days that we played down in Panthersville at their field that created some just crazy numbers in a game. Like we actually scored 35 runs in a game once. Again, so that was.
I do not remember that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Coach, I went and did a little research. That was my freshman year. It was 35-9 that game.
Whoa.
35-9.
The wind was blowing that day. The wind was blowing out so hard. It was blowing out like 40 miles an hour, and it was like blowing the pitchers off the rubber and everything. And so there's a lot of balls just sailing out of that park and everything. But I remember driving down to Panthersville, and it did seem like Georgia State was kind of a young program trying to get started. And we had a home and away with them every year. And then in '84, my last year, we actually played 2 home games against them and only 1 away game. But they were fun times, and it was good to play where you didn't have to travel real far, because when you go to Tech and you play a lot of teams, you're traveling on a bus for hours and hours and hours and missing classes and days and things like that. And Georgia State was just across town, so.
So, cool. Coach Boomer, you played for a pretty historic baseball program in Georgia Tech. Do you have any big-time memories of any big-time games that you guys played in? Any professional players that you might have faced off against in your time?
Oh, yeah. There's really too many to mention. As far as, famous baseball players that I, got to play against, Kevin Brown was the major league's probably most successful pitcher, at least, financially. He was a teammate of mine, actually. And he walked onto the team. He didn't even get a scholarship like most of us. And when he came out, he was tall and skinny, and, nobody thought much about him. But I can remember standing in the batter's box, and when he was throwing bullpen some, just to get a look at him. And I remember thinking, this guy is going to be really, really good. And, it turned out he was. But a lot of names, Bo Jackson, I played against him a few times when he was at Auburn, and he was a phenom physically, obviously. But I think for Atlanta Braves fans, B.J. Surhoff was an Atlanta Brave for a while. I played against him, at North Carolina. But there's too many. When you play in the ACC, there's just a lot of players who go on to do things. Yeah.
Coach McGuire, do you have one memory or a few memories from your time, maybe some famous players that you played against, or a big game that you won here or there?
Well, there are a few. When you're an up-and-coming program and just getting started, a lot of these big-time schools want to schedule a Georgia State at that time, because they're kind of thinking, well, we're going to go and play a brand-new program. We're going to more than likely win that ball game. So it did offer a lot of opportunity for Georgia State to play a lot of SEC schools, a lot of ACC schools, and we were definitely overmatched. There's no doubt about it. When you're a second or third year up and coming program and you're going against the likes of a Florida State, who was at that time coached by Mike Martin, who is the NCAA's all-time winningest baseball coach. And you're playing against the Georgia Bulldogs and the Florida Gators and the Gamecocks from South Carolina. Our schedule was brutal. And I questioned our athletic director at the time. I said, why did you schedule those type of programs? We should be playing teams like Southern Tech or Shorter or Birmingham Southern or schools, that would be that we'd at least have an opportunity to compete against. But I'm going to tell you, being an Atlanta native, I grew up as a huge Georgia Tech fan. I mean, that was my school. I've been going to Georgia Tech football games since the late 60s and love Georgia Tech. And I would have loved to have gone to Georgia Tech, but my grades didn't allow me to get there. I did speak to Coach Morris a few times, but my grades were not good enough to get in. And I regret that now, but anytime Georgia State played Georgia Tech, I was really inspired only because my love for Georgia Tech. And I always had some really good games against Georgia Tech. So those are some good memories for me, facing quality team like Georgia Tech and Coach Boomer's team and that lineup. Those were household names back in the 80s, that lineup of his. And sure enough, my younger brother was a teammate of Coach Boomer at Georgia Tech as well.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, and matter of fact, Coach Boomer brought up Kevin Brown, who was at one time the highest paid baseball player in Major League Baseball. My brother and Kevin Brown were roommates along with Jim Poole. And Jim Poole was a legendary pitcher down at Georgia Tech as well, and Coach Boomer can attest to that. But Coach, the fact of the day is when the Atlanta Braves won the World Series, Jim Poole was the pitcher of record when Dave Justice hit the home run in Game 6 to allow the Atlanta Braves to win the World Series that year. So I'm a big fan of Georgia Tech baseball, and when my playing days were over, I would scamper down to the ball field down there. Coach Boomer, what was the name of the field down there at the time? I'm drawing a blank. Field? Yeah, Rose Bowl Field, and watch, my brother and Coach Boomer play on the same team together. Coach Boomer and I really didn't know each other well at all during our college days, but I knew of him, and I knew what type of a ball player he was and what a tough out he was in that lineup. And I had the complete respect for him as a ball player because I did see him play a lot. Not only did we play against each other, but when my career ended, he still had a couple of years to go, and he was playing with my brother at the time. And so that's where our baseball affiliation kind of got started.
Yeah, well, I want to throw a shout out to your brother. I mean, he was a not only a great teammate and a friend at the time, but he was a one heck of a good hitter, and that obviously runs in the McGuire family because Pat could whack that ball around the park. He was really something special, and we were all kind of let down. He was really coming on, and then he had some health issues and had to take a year away, and when he came back to really do most of his damage, it was after the years after I left.
Right.
But he was special. He was.
He was a great ball player. He like you said, he had some health issues and had to take a year off and had a medical red shirt, but he came back very determined and he was on 3 ACC championship teams his sophomore, junior, senior years, and they had some great ball players, as you know, and you played with them. But he certainly left his mark there. So off the field, I am a big Georgia Tech baseball / athletics fan, and I appreciate and respect all that Coach Boomer did because he played against some incredible competition in the ACC at that time. It was maybe one of the best conferences in the United States at the time, and the record speaks for themselves. Georgia Tech is a powerhouse baseball program, and during the 80s and 90s, it was one of the top programs in the country year in and year out.
And do either of you have a chance to stay up to date with the current teams at Georgia Tech and Georgia State now?
Yeah, I actually was doing some radio color for Georgia Tech baseball a little bit this season when they needed somebody to fill in. So I got to get prepped a little bit and learn a lot about them, but also watch them play some games and commentate and stuff. So that was really fun. It's just disappointing for those kids too to have their seasons come to an end. Everybody had hopes and dreams, and everybody still was in the running to do something special. And it had to come to an end.
I've kept up with Georgia State more of late. As time has gone by, they have done a really good job with their baseball program. It's a well-respected program that has done well in the recruiting aspect now nationally, whereas back in the day when I played, it was all locally because there were no college dorms. Now they have the dorms. They have a big push for athletics down there, as you know, because of football. And so they have come a long way since I was there. And so their baseball alumni has really developed of late. And I would say I've gone to 3 or 4 Georgia State University baseball alumni functions, and they'll host it down at Panthersville or they'll host it down at Georgia State. And there's the dream down there, and I don't know when it's going to begin, but the former Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, that footprint is still there. It's a parking lot right now, but there's hope that Georgia State in the next year or two, they're going to break ground right there on that footprint and play their college baseball games right there in downtown Atlanta. And what a push that would be to really put them on the map.
That would be huge. And I was riding my bike over there the other day, and there's cranes up over there and everything. Yeah. Like, I don't know if they're getting started or if they're building something else or what, but it's a busy looking place, that old parking lot. They might actually be starting it now for all I know.
I got a chance to play on that field my senior year in high school at Atlanta Fulton County. When I made that all-star team, we got to play at the stadium.
Yeah, you and I were on the field at the same time because I played in that game too. Yeah.
And just, when I was down there for that alumni function, it brought back all kind of memories of playing in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium and just experiencing that. So I do hope that Georgia State does pursue that and continues to go forward in their athletics, and they're certainly doing a good job with it right now.
It's interesting you say that. I didn't realize you were in that game. We might have actually been on the bench together or maybe playing against each other.
Well, I was 79. I was 79-80. I started the school year in 1979. So I was –
okay, so mine would have been 1980. Okay,
right,
so
the year
we're a year apart. Okay.
Yeah.
So, Coach Boomer, not unlike Coach McGuire, you actually didn't go into coaching and teaching immediately. So, can you talk about? You saw you had a career in the military. Can you talk about your decision to be an officer in the military and how that experience was for you?
I when my baseball playing days were over and I finally graduated from Georgia Tech, I took a job with Delta Airlines, actually as an engineer working on airplanes and after a couple of years of doing that, having been a part of a team and with a lot of camaraderie and being very active, I kind of got the feeling like I didn't want to be behind a desk that much, for the rest of my life. And I kind of developed a love of flying, actually. And some of my friends at Delta were all, we're all about aviation. And so I started flying privately and enjoyed it a lot, but also felt like I wanted to, serve my country and do something that was a little more active. And so I decided to join the Marines, and I went in on a flight contract for them, to be an aviator in the Marine Corps. So that's kind of how it all got started. But I was found not physically qualified at flight school. I failed an eye test. And at the time there was budget cuts and they needed to cut back on the number of pilots. So I ended up working on airplanes instead of flying them, in the Marines. So the reason behind it was just kind of needing a change, wanting to serve my country, and a love of flying. But I look back, and although it was extremely disappointing during the time where I was not allowed to continue in the flight program, but my time in the Marines was so formative and so important to me and my growth, I think, as a human being and as an adult. I don't regret that at all. I think it was the greatest experience of my life, to be honest with you.
How many total years did you spend in the Marines before coming back to Atlanta?
I didn't actually come back to Atlanta. I was in the Marines for 5 years, and my wife and I had our first child, and I was looking at a pretty aggressive deployment schedule, and just kind of decided that I wanted to be a family person and a dad first, And I love the Marine Corps, and I think if kids weren't in the picture, or I probably would have stayed in. But I decided to get out, and I went to work in the paper industry, and I worked at several different locations around the eastern part of the United States. I didn't actually come back to Atlanta until I started to work at Westminster some 20 some odd years later, after leaving.
So, Coach McGuire, let's talk about your days after college. So you spent a few years as a grad assistant, but what was next for you after your days at Georgia State?
So I did spend 2 years as a grad assistant at Georgia State. Loved that. But then when you're only getting paid $200 a month, you got to go make some other decisions. So I used that time basically as to gain tons of experience, and I was working with a great head coach. I learned a lot from him. So it padded my resume a little bit. Then I finally came to the conclusion I got to go get a real job. So having a PE degree, I started my teaching career at Sarah Smith Elementary School, which is, right around the corner from Westminster. A lot of our Westminster kids come from Sarah Smith. So I was really teaching the same type of clientele kids in a great school. And I taught at Sarah Smith for 15 years. Meanwhile, when my teaching day ended, I would leave Sarah Smith and drive over to Sutton Middle School. I started the middle school baseball program at Sutton and coached there for 2 years. And then those kids that I taught or coached at Sutton, the majority of them went to North Atlanta. Well, the North Atlanta high school baseball coach resigned, and they approached me and asked me if I'd like to coach high school baseball at North Atlanta. And I said, this is a great opportunity because the majority of those kids that I had at Sutton are now rolling over to North Atlanta. So I get to coach them over at the high school level now. So I spent 2 years at North Atlanta as the head baseball coach. It was a great experience for me. And then my principal, Dr. Lee Friedman at Sarah Smith, became the lower school principal at Westminster. And he picked up the phone one day and gave me a call and said, would you like to come over to Westminster and teach physical education, and maybe there's some coaching opportunities for you? And I said, where do I sign? Immediately, because I knew of the Westminster reputation and being an Atlantan and knowing all about the school and the history and the tradition and the culture there. I said, this is just a great opportunity for me. So I'm very thankful to Dr. Friedman for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. So I came to Westminster in 2001, finishing my 19th year at Westminster, and have never looked back. It's a great place. And I started my coaching as the head 8th and 9th grade baseball coach and served 2 years at that level. And then Coach Jim Jefferson, legendary Coach Jim Jefferson, asked me if I'd come and serve as his assistant, which I did. And just so happened that Coach Chad Laney was also an assistant with me back in, I guess I'm talking 2006, 7, 8, 9, and all those years. We coached together as Coach Jefferson's assistant. So been on the varsity ever since, and I've had the pleasure of working with Jim Jefferson, who was in the Georgia Dugout Hall of Fame as well. And then also got the wonderful opportunity to coach under Russell Wren, who led us to the state championship a few years ago. And I'm loving being Coach Laney's assistant right now.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Coach Russell Wren came back to town last year and faced Westminster with his new high school up north.
He certainly did. And what a unique experience that was for him and for us. Here, this, fantastic baseball coach that left his mark at Westminster decides to go back to Gilman and coach at his alma mater, and has done a wonderful job there. And so, sure enough, the first thing he did was he picked up the phone and said, Coach Laney, Coach McGuire, I want to come down. I want to play you guys during spring break. And so we did set up a game with his team, and they were good. Jack, you remember that ball game?
I don't think we won. I remember
It didn't go well.
I remember a
No.
moonshot home run that sailed into the trees, and that's about it.
Yeah, they were good. We hung in there with them, but we were a little outclassed that day. We didn't play as well as I hoped, and I think Russell Wren certainly had his team fired up and ready to play us. But it was a great experience, and we had a tradition that Russell started when he first began as our head coach. I guess it's 5 years ago, but he would always have somebody throw out the pregame opening pitch. And we kind of flipped that on him. So when he came to Westminster that night before the game started, we had him come out to the pitcher's mound and throw out the first pitch. And we really gave him a nice, warm welcome back home.
It was a good first pitch. He was warmed up from all that on-field batting practice he was throwing early in the day, the legendary southpaw batting practice from Coach Wren.
He has a rubber arm. He and I tried to outduel each other during pregame batting practice year in and year out, and I could not hang with him. He is a magician throwing strikes all the time. He's a great batting practice pitcher.
Well, Coach McGuire, as a left-handed hitter, I will say I prefer you on the batting practice. Every time I stepped in against Coach Wren or you, Coach Boomer, too, it's like, oh, I already get lefty enough. Do I really have to go through it in batting practice?
Yeah, you're in a defensive situation there. Those are two crafty lefties, Jack, and they know how to work the ball in the strike zone. So I felt for you when you had to come up there and take your batting practice.
Well, as Coach Wren would say, it's not right-hand. You've got the right-handed people, and then you've got the correct-handed people. That's
right.
That's what the lefties are.
That's right.
And so we talked about, collegiate memories earlier, but looking back, what were some of your favorite Westminster baseball memories?
Well, I'm going to, without a doubt, say the greatest moment in my coaching career, maybe in my education career over the 34 years, was the moment we won the state championship. We were that year, came in second place in our region behind Blessed Trinity. They were a baseball powerhouse and odds-on favorite to win the AAA classification again. They had won several in a row. They were a loaded baseball team with talented collegiate athletes that were going to play at the next level, and some of them were going on to play at the major league level and get drafted. The deck was stacked against us because they had beaten us during the regular season 15-0 and 9-1, and we just could not play well against them. They just really owned us. But on that magical night when we advanced to the state championship and we faced them that evening, and everything just lined up for us, and we played a great two games, and Rankin Woley left his mark, magically with what he did that night. And but being able to jump on that dog pile when the last out was made in dramatic fashion, we had the bases loaded, they're batting, the bases loaded, and the tying runs on third and the winning runs on second, and Rankin makes this unbelievable play and throws it home to get the force out with the bases loaded. And it was just such a relief that our players went absolutely crazy that night in the dog pile. And that's just a moment. If you could bottle up a feeling and capture that and keep it for the rest of your life and feel that for the rest of your life, it's as good as it gets. But that certainly is the magical moment. But Westminster has left me with a lot of memories and great kids. And that's what I remember the most, are the kids that we have the opportunity to coach, and they're first-class kids. And you forget the scores, you forget the victories, you forget your losses, but you'll never forget the kids and the moments that you have with those kids. And to me, that's priceless. I'll take away those relationships that you have with those kids over the years. And when they come back to see you, we have a lot of our alumni, baseball alumni, come to the game, and they'll come by and see you and shake your hand and give you a hug and say, "Coach, I remember when you told us to do this," or "Do you remember this play that I made in the game that, against Lovett?" And so you relive those moments, and those are just great moments that you get to experience as a coach.
And Coach McGuire, is it special for you being a third, fourth, fifth grade PE teacher to see young baseball players like me, or a Big Drew Berg coming through the elementary school, or Charlie Wycliffe or Jonathan Morgan? You see them coming through the fifth grade, and then you get to know them, and then you get to play with them and coach them in high school. Is that special to get to see them as kids and then back in the high school baseball world?
Absolutely. I get to double dip. You know, I get to teach you as a third, fourth, and fifth grader, and I see your athleticism at that young age. And then you're telling me, or these players are telling me that they're baseball players, they're playing at NYO or Buckhead or wherever. And then you get to see them grow in the program, and you get to see them, you know, do well with their young teams. And then the 8th and 9th grade team and the JV team, and you get to see them grow. You know, that's the biggest transformation, is the physical difference between those 7 or 8 years. And yes, Jack, it's a treat to be able to teach those players and to coach them later on in their career.
I mean, you get the best of both worlds. You get to skip the adolescent middle school part, and you get the cute little kids and then the big grown up hitting home runs. And Coach Boomer, let's move on to you. So we talked about a little bit earlier about how you didn't immediately go into teaching. You were in the military, the paper business for a little bit.
Yeah.
When did you decide that you wanted to start being a teacher? I mean, we knew you had the intelligence from that 1984 ACC honor roll achievement that you got while you were playing. But when did you decide you wanted to be a teacher, and how did you go about getting into that?
Well, that's a good question. I did about 10 years in the paper industry, and it kind of, you know, worked my way up the chain a little bit in terms of, you know, management and level of responsibility and all that kind of stuff, and kind of found that my life was too one-dimensional, you know. And during that time, I played a lot of amateur baseball as an adult, but I stopped at the age of 37, and I just couldn't play center field anymore, you know, the position I wanted to, because I was getting a little too slow. And so I kind of stepped away from the game a little bit, and then it just became all work all the time. And by the time I got to be 40, I realized, like, I can't live without the sport that I love, you know. And I wanted to be involved in other academic type things and artistic things that weren't available to me in an all-consuming kind of one-dimensional career. And so at the age of 40, I made a decision to go into teaching. And I went to a boarding school first in New York, and I worked there for 13 years. And they made me the head baseball coach coming in. And so I was a head coach there for 13 years before coming to Westminster in 2014. So that was kind of the idea behind it, was just wanting to have a lot more diverse interest, you know, get satisfied really in the profession, and and get back into the game of baseball.
And Coach Boomer, when you first came to Westminster, you were actually the golf coach for 2 years. How did that pan out before you actually saw the diamond?
Well, the golf players were really good, and they didn't require a lot of coaching, which was a good thing. So they all knew more about the game than I did, and really I was more of a cheerleader and a bus driver and an organizer than I was anything else. And I loved those kids, and I had a great time. And but you know, when Russell left, we were all very, very sad to see him go. But I was approached not too long after he announced his intentions, you know, to leave, you know, to see if I wanted to join baseball. And even though I was enjoying golf a lot and enjoying, you know, being able to play at country clubs and stuff myself, along with the boys, but my heart was too much into baseball. I couldn't turn that down, you know, when the offer came my way. So I was really glad to accept that and to start working for Coach Laney. And I got just a ton of respect for him. And you know, it's been a blast. You guys don't know, behind the scenes, we have such good chemistry together as a coaching staff. It's a blast to be with them. And part of the reason we're all hurting right now is because we don't get to see each other every day, you know, and just rib each other or do whatever. But that's how it happened. I took a golf coach job because Westminster wanted people to coach when they came to work here, and they had an opening in golf. And I'm like, well, I'm a pretty decent golfer. I'll coach that, whatever, sure, you know. But when baseball came open, I couldn't turn it down.
And do you have any favorite memories? Coach McGuire covered his, but do you have any favorite Westminster baseball memories from your time here?
Yeah, the state championship, I was not a coach on the field at that time. I was aware that I was going to be a coach when that happened, and I was there, but I was outside the fence, and that was still a great memory for me. But as a coach on the field, I would have to say it happened against Jefferson, you know, last year in the playoffs. we met them in the first round, and they were 26-1. Going into that and into that series, and they were expected to be the state champions at the 3A level, and we had just gotten beat, I think, 6 consecutive games by our rivals in our region, Lovett, Pace, and Redan, and where we were reeling going into that series, having played some pretty bad baseball and gotten really humbled. And Coach McGuire and I got a chance to go down there and scout that team pretty hard for a couple of games. And we put together a lot of notes. We had a plan. And I remember he and I were walking across the parking lot as we left the field thinking, we can beat these guys. I think this is a really good matchup. And I felt like I had a pretty good pitching plan to go against some of their hitters. And they had a lot of lefty bats in their lineup, and we had a lot of lefty throwers. And sure enough, it was a great series. It went the full 3 games. We had a lead in the 3rd game, and they were walking us down and had the tying and winning runs on base. And Charlie Wycliffe, we brought him in to face a left-handed batter who was a power guy in the middle of their lineup. And I knew if we got to a point where we could put him away, what pitch I wanted to call. And we got it to that count, and I called it for Charlie, and I'm so proud that he executed that pitch and he struck that guy out, and then it was bedlam. And the mosh pit that the coaches made in the dugout and some of the stuff we were yelling and screaming, I can't repeat here. But like that was that, I've played a lot of baseball and had a lot of crazy and wonderful things happen. But I think that moment for me was actually greater than any I experienced even as a player. It was so satisfying. We were such underdogs, and we went on to lose the next series, but it didn't matter at that moment. When we knocked them off after playing so poorly for 6 straight games and really looking like we couldn't get out of our own way, it was spectacular to be a coach at that moment.
I mean, I remember that whole kind of area as a player. I mean, we were like the bad news bears for those last 6 games the region play, and we were like, oh, this is going to be ugly.
Yeah, I didn't want to use that language, but I was thinking it.
we saw Jefferson, and they were like number 1, and all of a sudden Coach Sterniolo comes in with a packet full of scouting reports and starts throwing it at everyone and said, we're throw all the left-handed pitchers we can at them. They can't hit the lefty. And then, I mean, I remember game 2 when like the lights went out in the doubleheader and we were just kind of laying in the grass for like 30 minutes. And then game 3 was, I mean, my nails didn't exist after game 3. I was biting them so much. That game was, I mean, and the picture of Coach Laney, video of Coach Laney sliding headfirst into a pile of us in the outfield after the game was over. And that is something that I won't forget as a player, at least.
Jack, you witnessed that, but I tip my cap specifically to Coach Boomer and his approach on how to get those Jefferson batters out. They were deadly hitters, and they were the defending state champion. And he crafted up masterful pitching game plans for all 3 of those ball games. And normally Coach Boomer and I kind of stand side by side in the dugout while he's orchestrating the pitches, and we're moving the defense around a little bit. But in that series, he kind of isolated himself on a bucket and sat over against the wall, kind of away from Coach Sterniolo and myself and Coach Laney. And he was in his own world, and we said, we're not going to go near him because he has got it. He's on it. And he was on his game that night masterfully. And if we don't have Coach Boomer in that series, we might not win. I don't think we win it. And I really feel that the reason we had success and won that series is because of Coach Boomer and the game plan that he improvised for all 3 of those games against a lethal team in a hostile environment, against one of the better baseball teams in the state of Georgia. And for us to celebrate that moment of victory was something that we will never forget.
Well, if memory serves me right, I don't think I threw a single pitch. So you can only give me so much credit. But,
well, you deserve it.
Those kids pitched well. They did. Yep.
Coach Boomer, would you say that was your Michael Jordan NBA Finals-esque coaching performance?
I think Coach McGuire's giving me a little too much credit.
No, not at all.
Well, I think that's all the time we have today on this podcast. It was definitely a fun time. I enjoyed, especially with the lack of baseball. The MLB The Show on PlayStation hasn't been enough baseball fix for me. So being able to have some nice conversation with you two coaches and then Reilly as well. Before we end, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Coach Boomer, Coach McGuire for joining us. And just as my high school days come to an end, just for their presence. And I remember Coach Boomer, the first time I really ran into him was in 10th grade when I had a C in honors math coming into second semester. And I was in the math lab about every morning for about 2 weeks. And he pulled me out of the gutter and kept my grade alive. And then from
You
Coach
crushed
McGuire,
it there at
and
the end. You crushed it, to be honest.
I got a 92 on that exam. And
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Another thing that we're going to give credit you for credit, I think credit is due. I think you really helped me. And then Coach McGuire in 5th grade, the intramurals. I remember every week in the afternoons playing some weird kickball or Star Wars. I mean, that was incredible. So I want to say thank you to both of you for being great coaches, educators, and just mentors through my time at Westminster.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Jack. You were without a doubt a delight and a pleasure to teach and to coach. And you have certainly left your mark at Westminster, and you're legendary WCAT guy. And there have been some wonderful play-by-play broadcasters that have come through Westminster in years past, but you are right there with them, and your future is extremely bright. And Coach Boomer and I are anxiously awaiting to see your path and your journey, to see where you land. And we're going to see you big time one day, but the best to you. Continued success. We miss you and we love you, man. And thanks for the memories you left on the field with us. I'll take those with me to my grave. And I'm proud of you. And your future is very bright. You're going to get through this little valley that we're in, but I guarantee you that road is really paved for you. And I know you got to give your props to Mr. Searle for giving you this opportunity. And look at all the kids before you that have gone on and landed wonderful jobs in the broadcasting business, and you're next. And so best of luck to you and to Coach Searle. Thank you for giving Jack and your boys and Reilly the opportunity to do what they're doing. They're fantastic, and what an experience.
Jackie, when you get that big first job in the booth, I want an invite. I'm just telling you right now. Remember where you came from.
Hey, Wiley Ballard gave you the invite, so it would only be right if I followed in his footsteps, and I'll definitely reach out. So that's all the time, like I said, that we have for the podcast today. We appreciate everyone, if you're listening till the end, for listening. For Reilly O'Neill, our co-host, and then our coaches, Doug Boomer and Coach Brent McGuire, I'm Jack Hunter from WCAT and our inaugural podcast. I mean, we might as well send this to the archives already. Signing off, go Cats.